Hello, everyone. This is Dominic from Tonebase, and I'm so excited to have Orli Shaham in the studio today. I actually first met her when I was just 11 years old in St. Louis, Missouri. So she's always been an inspiration to me growing up as I've followed her career, looked up to her, learned from her. And I can't wait to learn from her with all of you today about this wonderful composer and woman, Clara Schumann. The title of this live stream is Clara Schumann, a musical pioneer and a composer you should know. So we'll be starting things off by speaking about was she a pioneer, and if so, how was she that? If you have any questions, please use that blue ask button so we can display the question later. I know we have a few already before the stream. Welcome everybody, and I'm going to welcome Orli now to the stage. So Orli, welcome. It's so great to see you. We can't wait to get into why Clara Schumann is someone that we should know very much about. So I mentioned pioneer. That word, what does that strike you? Is that something that you would agree with in aspects?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. First of all, thank you, Dominic. It's so great to work with you, even though we've had this interesting working relationship over so many years, and it's great to see the things you're doing for Tonebase and
Well, thank you.
all the other things I see you doing and performing. So it's fabulous.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So this question of Clara Schumann, was she a pioneer, and did she want to be a pioneer, and is she somebody that thought of herself as a pioneer? And I would say it's a loaded question. She definitely didn't think of herself as a pioneer. She thought of herself as a pianist. And that was really her identity, was so tied up in that's what she was forever. At the same time, she did do things that hadn't been done before. You and I were talking a little bit about this before. She was one of the first to play Beethoven sonatas complete from beginning to end. The practice at that time was to do either just one, the first movement, or maybe the second and third, or second, third, and fourth, or just the second, or whatever it was. So she was the one first to play them in their completeness, and she also was one of the first to play entire recitals from memory. She introduced music that had kind of been left off the concert stage for a long time, music of Bach and Haydn and Mozart, that at that time was less popular, right, than the big show-off sort of pieces. And she, so she brought those things. She certainly was one of the first women to compose very seriously and to have a career as a concert pianist really alongside men, because for a long time there were many female pianists, but they were sort of relegated to the domestic sphere, the private sphere. They would play in salons, but not necessarily in big public concerts. And she did that her whole life. So maybe the best way to look at her life is actually to go back to the beginning and where she was when she was first starting out. We hear this term child prodigy thrown around all the time, and certainly after Mozart, there were waves and waves of child prodigies and parents who thought this would be a great idea to take them out and show them. And some of them were tremendously talented. But there's also this implication that once they were no longer children, they would no longer be of musical interest. And I think this is one of the things that one of the sort of definitions that Clara defies. Her father was definitely a stage father, but he was a very specific kind of stage father, which is also a genius master piano teacher. So it's a kind of a lucky combination. He had that personality of, way too pushy. I mean, talk about micromanagement, including what she would have for breakfast and what time she needed to get up after a performance. All those things were part of her regimen. How long she needed to take a walk for, every day in order to keep her physical health up, things like that. But at the same time, he clearly had a brilliant understanding of the piano. He had his own method that he worked from. He kind of put together. His students later said that he almost put together different methods for each student to kind of work with whatever their needs were. And he recognized in Clara a talent very, very early. So I think Dominic's got a photo to show us. This is Clara already at the ripe old age of 15. This was 6 years into her concert-giving career. If you can believe it. She was already, she had already been performing in not only in other people's recitals, but actually giving her own recitals in Leipzig. She was sort of the toast of the town, and she was touring outside, and he was spearheading all of this. He was arranging the hotels, he was booking the concerts, he was getting the money. And you can, as you can imagine, there's some psychological damage done when there's this level of interaction between, his interests and hers. But one of the things I've been spending all this time reading about her lately, especially this incredible book here, Clara Schumann, The Artist and the Woman by Nancy Reich, which I highly recommend. You can say a lot of negatives about Frederick Wieck, but you can also credit him with the fact that Clara never thought of herself as anything less than somebody capable of being a world-class pianist. He never let her think that because she was a woman, she shouldn't. He never suggested that she shouldn't compose. It never occurred to her in her upbringing that she would do anything but what she ended up doing, which was a complete anomaly in the first half of the 19th century. It was incredibly rare for somebody to keep a performing career, for example, after getting married. And she never once questioned that she would keep doing that, and she kept performing for the rest of her life. I think that confidence in her abilities, in her art, is something that he very much gave her. And clearly, he also gave her a terrific foundation in piano playing. So fast forward to this drawing that Dominic had when she was all of 15 years old. By now, she's beginning to be extra famous and actually pioneering and championing works. She's also composing. She's performing her own pieces in her concerts, which was a typical thing that men did in those days. So never once thinking about whether she should or shouldn't do that. And a couple of years after that picture, she plays all Beethoven's Appassionata, which, as you know, is not the easiest piano sonata. And she played it in its entirety, which, again, was not done by so many people. People didn't dare at the time. And would you believe Franz Grillparzer, the poet, was at one of her performances and wrote this incredible poem. Now, this is 1838, so she's all of about 19 years old when he immortalizes her in this poem. And I don't know if you can you can see this. I don't know how many of you out there can read 19th century German just like that at the drop of a hat. So I have a translation in English, and I will read you the poem. It's called Clara Wieck and Beethoven, F minor sonata. A great magician, tired of world and life, murmuring, shut his genius in a shrine of diamonds and secured it well from men, then cast the key into the ocean depths and died. In vain the busy horde of little men strove round about it, for no master key shot back the bolt, and all its magic slept, as slept the master. A shepherd child, playing upon the strand, watching the hurried, self-imposed search, thoughtless yet thoughtful as girls used to be, lets her white fingers fall into the flood and seizes, raises, holds the wondrous key. She hastens while her quickened heart beats fast and flies to where the shrine is watching her. The key fits and the lid flies back. The spirits rise from the depths and bow submissive heads before this gracious and pure-hearted mistress who leads them with white fingers while she plays. I don't know about you, but somebody
Beautiful.
could write a poem like that about me. I'd be okay with that,
Oh
right?
my gosh. So illustrative. I mean, it's amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us.
So basically what he's saying is that all these people were trying to understand and play Beethoven, and only she understood. And this was in large part due to Wieck's training, and also to her friendship with Mendelssohn. Of course, she was growing up in Leipzig. Mendelssohn is maybe 10 years older than she is, but was already quite established because he himself having been a child prodigy, right? So, but this big Bach renaissance that he made in the city and really in Europe filtered down to her. He became a lifelong friend. And in fact, many years later, after he had died and she was kind of in difficult financial circumstances, she only ever accepted money from two people. One was Brahms, and the other was Mendelssohn's brother, who understood where she was. So this was a very close friendship, and she learned a lot from him. I also feel like she learned an enormous amount from him in terms of writing. She played his music all the time, and she knew all of his piano pieces. I think as we look later into these Opus 21 romances, if you use as your background the songs without words, that will help a lot in understanding her style, her sort of phrase length, her general characters, the flightiness. Can you hear that motorcycle? The flightiness
yes.
of her music. The other composer who was a huge influence on her from the very beginning is Chopin, who was about the same age as Robert Schumann. We'll get to him in a second. He had a slight impact on her life too. But Chopin, she played from the very beginning, and apparently her La ci darem la mano variations were something to die for. She was famous for how she played those, and they're incredibly virtuosic and very romantic, and lots of rubato, and this was her milieu. She clearly excelled at that in a way that very few people did in those days. So that influence is also found in her piano music. And then, of course, as I hinted, there's Robert Schumann, the love of her life, and the man who would become her husband, but also her partner, her musical partner in so many ways. He came into her life when she was not yet a teenager. Interestingly, although he was almost a decade older than she was, because he hadn't studied music formally, and she had been trained so formally from such a young age, they were in many ways equals when he first came into her life. And in fact, he came to study with her father, became a boarder in their house, and the two of them took their music lessons together with him. So that together they were learning about Bach and about Beethoven, but also certain things about finger technique, that Wieck had sort of his own idea about methodology with that. So while she clearly admired him and looked up to him as an older man, and she probably had a crush on him from a very young age, I think in certain ways they were musical equals from the very beginning. She was clearly the one who excelled at performing. He was the one who excelled at composition, but they both did both of those things. And there was a lot of interaction, and there was a lot of conversation between the two of them about composing, so that from the very beginning, she writes little pieces and he quotes them in his pieces, which are more mature, more grand than hers. And also she became the best interpreter of his music, at least according to him, which is a pretty good person to count on.
That.
So for her whole life she would perform them, but she was very strategic. One of the things I've loved learning about her is that she realized that his compositions were a little out there. They were a little formally unusual, formally breaking boundaries, and maybe harmonically as well. So she would, in the case of his music, she would often extract the movements that she thought were most likely to succeed. And she was such a savvy performer that she would specifically play, for that audience, I'll play these 3 movements from Carnival, but for that audience, I can do those 5 movements. And, after 1 a.m., when most people leave and only the connoisseurs stay, then I can play the sonata. That sort of thing. And she really took it upon herself to protect his reputation. She knew from the very beginning, she knew he was going to be an enormous success, but she suspected it would take a while to get there.
If I may, that's an interesting point you make, that she was not necessarily playing complete works all the time. Mm-hmm. And that is something that we talk about on Tonebase, that should we learn the whole Carnival? Of course we might at some point, but people like her were playing movements, and that's a very antique concept. A modern concept is very completionist, right? Do you have any thoughts on that? Because a lot of us want to play our favorite things, and sometimes we feel a little embarrassed or a little bit insecure about doing that.
Oh no, I think it's great. I think putting together programs of your favorite ideas, if they lead to each other in some way, if they work together, that's brilliant. That's wonderful, and it would have been completely composer approved to do such a thing. In the case of almost all of the composers that you can imagine. So I think certainly until we get to the latter part of the 19th century, and then I think again from later on, it kind of goes in waves, this cycle. No, I think by all means play different ones. In this set of Opus 21, these 3 romances, you could play 1, you could play 2, you could play 3, you could play a combination, you could play 2 plus 3 or 1 plus 3. I think Clara would just be thrilled that you're playing her music, right?
Thank you.
And that's a great question. I love that. So, okay, so we left her off. She's this terrific performer. She's going all over Europe, and she marries this incredible man. And almost from the very beginning, they start having children. I think Dominic's got a picture there of her with her daughter Marie, who later on became one of the people who helped her out the most, who traveled with her and kind of helped, she would steam the dresses or take care of the other children so that Clara could practice, that sort of thing. And the Schumanns had a lot of children. They clearly did not believe in birth control of any kind, although there were things available at the time, and other female performers clearly used something. But she was pregnant once after the other, and she would just keep performing. So this was very unusual. And even Robert was a little bit taken aback. I think he was initially expecting her to kind of be a housewife who would support him, but he knew what art meant to her, and she had written to him very early on about how important her art was, and this idea of performing and being on stage. So she would perform all the way up to giving birth, and then within a month she was back at it. And in a sense, she really had to, because he wasn't really earning any money. His compositions brought in very little. She always, from the very beginning of their marriage, she always earned more than he did. And he kept very meticulous books on this, so we have all the records. And of course, when he was not well, she really had no choice but to keep performing and doing all of those things. So we can see another picture of her. This is at 35. By this point in her life, she's a woman who's experienced a lot. Not only has she had to move cities and done all these performances, she's given birth to a number of kids. She's lost one already. She would end up losing a few within her lifetime. And she has this husband whose depression is clearly bigger than she had realized. And things are very difficult, and there are times when he has to go to this sanatorium and she cannot visit him there. The doctors didn't think it would be a good idea for him. She didn't even know if she could take it. And yet here she is during all this time still performing. And I think we have a list of just the performances. This is around 1854, just where she was in a few months, trying to earn money and doing what she loved best. So certainly it was what she loved, but her heart was always with the family. She was always writing letters home, being very methodical, a little micromanaging, a little bit maybe like her father. The kids should do this, make sure they do that, don't forget that they do that. Send them here. And meanwhile, performing and loving this man so much. Well, 1853, there was another young composer who comes into the picture, Johannes Brahms. And like Schumann had been a boarder in her father's house and studied there, Brahms came and lived with the Schumanns and studied there. And Robert and Clara had actually been studying music together throughout their married lives. They took, for example, a year to study counterpoint together. And during this year, she wrote a lot of fugues. They took a year to study songs together. And, both of their outputs really were based on this study they undertook together. So Brahms joined into that circle very easily and clearly inspired her to go back to composing. The one thing that had kind of given way for raising all those kids was composition. She didn't quite have enough time for that. So she would do a little bit now and again, but not as much as she had done as a young woman. So she's back to composing. Her husband's further away. 1853, her husband was still sort of unstable, but not fully away. And she wrote these three very beautiful romances at the piano. And then this interaction with Brahms continues. Well, it turns out their whole lives, Robert and Clara had quoted each other's music in their own music. So much so that if you go back and look at, her Opus 3, for example, and some of his pieces from Davidsbund-Latenza, it's actually hard to know who wrote what first. I don't even remember all the examples right now, but there are quite a few where, did Robert write that theme or did Clara write that theme? And they write in their letters, they say, he says, I've got your theme stuck in my head, but he's referring to his piece, right? So we don't even know the level of interaction there. Brahms loved this idea and also thought it would be great to start including their quotations from their music in his writing. So the two of them undertake to writing a set of variations on a theme by Robert Schumann, and we have just this little example to show you. In it, Brahms takes the same Opus 3 work of hers, so very early work that Schumann had quoted so many years before, He weaves it into one of the final variations in his set. Clara's set, by the way, is stunning. If you don't know this set of her set of variations on a theme by Robert Schumann, it is really a spectacular work of music. The variations were a very strong suit for her. She had played quite a lot, and she knew how to write in different styles very well. And she does the same thing. She weaves her own melody there, just on the inside with this theme. So you can see there's this musical sort of conversation taking place amongst the three of them, and it's in that context that she writes these that she goes back to these three romances. So, like I said. The doctors thought she shouldn't visit Robert. She maybe thought it would be too much for her also, but it was killing her not to do it. She missed him awfully. The diary entries are just heartbreaking. And one day, Brahms went to visit him at the sanatorium, and this day, finally, she had some peace and quiet at home. No kids. Brahms was out of the house. Robert's out of the house, so she goes to her piano and she starts composing. And she wrote what became the first romance of this set really in a day. And it involves, it includes all her feelings, all her emotions about everything that she has undergone. We've seen already what her life has been to this point. And she includes it in this set that eventually she publishes. And I'd like to look at the set actually backwards. Maybe we'll start from the end and work our way forward. Just to give you a sense, so here she is, a consummate performer, a great programmer. The last one is going to be fast, and it's going to be exciting, and it's going to be a real crowd pleaser, right? So the fingers are going to be flying and moving quickly, and it starts like this. Just the first sort of theme, and you can tell by how tricky it is to just play off the chart that she knew her way around the piano. And the first thing that I want to talk about, actually, before I even get to talking about that part, the even earlier thing that I want to talk to you all about is the editions. There are two editions of this music. There's this beautiful one, which has an introduction by Nancy Reich, which is quite interesting, and was published by Dover. And there's this one, which is published by Henley, and they're incredibly different in how they look on the inside. So while I love the editing in this one and some of the comments by Nancy Reich, I play from the Henley because it's just much easier for me to read. I don't know, Dominic, can you show us the first page of number 3?
Yes.
In the Dover edition?
In the Dover, yes.
It's such a mess. It's so hard. It looks so notey, and it's so thick and crunchy, and I confess it nearly scared me off the piece when I first saw it.
Sure, it looks horrendous.
And I don't know if you can compare that now with the first page of the third movement in the Henley. It's just so much cleaner, which I think you cannot. You cannot overestimate the importance of the psychological importance of the look on the page when you're trying to learn something. This is difficult anyway, but like I said, I like the Henley. There is, of course, the question of one edition being called the Clara Schumann works and the other one being called the Wieck Schumann, which is a big topic for feminist history. She would not have liked Wieck Schumann. She never went by Wieck Schumann. She was delighted to drop the Wieck when she became the Schumann. And she never went back to her old pieces and said, Clara Wieck. She never specifically asked for them to be called that. But of course, this acknowledges the fact that she wasn't always a Schumann. Tricky topics. Please, if you have any brilliant thoughts on it, put them in the comments, or if you have any thoughts, Dominic.
No, it's just so interesting how times have changed and how different traditions and customs change, but also it's really inspiring to see just how selfless she was, in terms of how she looked up to Robert, and and she was much more famous than him. That's something that, again,
she really was.
To reiterate, again, she was a superstar, and honestly, he wasn't.
And it was kind of her and Liszt and maybe Thalberg and
Yeah.
Anton Rubinstein. Those
Yeah.
were the four pianists, for years. And because she kept concertizing her whole life, her career outlasted all of theirs as a performer, actually. So her influence as a performer. And then, of course, she became, and we won't really talk too much about this part, but she became a really respected pedagogue. And there she was known as Madame Schumann. So I think go with what she wanted later in life. That's what I would, that would be my inclination. But
Sounds right.
But who am I? Anyway, so we were talking about number 3. And all I can say to you is that the first thing you need to do is write in your fingerings, because otherwise you will end up like Chico Marx and your fingers will be knotted up. You won't actually make it to the end. It's so beautifully written here. You could really see the influence of Chopin. I think something like this. This way of reaching with her hand, the kind of circles that the hand naturally has to make in order to get to each of those notes fast enough, this limberness of the wrist, that's such a Chopin thing. And she would have known that absolutely from him. I have a million other things that I could talk about. If you look over at measure 21, one of the other things she was a master of, because of the way she had been trained, is voice leading and chromatic voice leading. She's always very careful to keep track of lines. And just like with Chopin, anytime you see a note with a double stem, a stem that goes both up and down, you have to really think about it. Why is it going both places? So right there in measure 21, the first note, this F, it's an 8th note on the bottom, but it's a 16th note on top. So it's part of this line, but it's also part of this line. Right, this line of notes that are stemmed underneath, so maybe the alto voice, if you want to think of it that way. And that issue should inform your fingering. As you're learning something like this, you go very, very slowly and figure out, well, what finger would I have to put there so that I don't end up playing? Because that's not right? She needs this needs length. This needs length. So like I say, very, very gnarly. We'll take a little time to put this one together, but it's so wonderful to do. And I just want to point out a couple of other little spots in this one that I love. Her second theme, which begins here, it begins in measure 29. Okay, my favorite part of that theme is that this appoggiatura up to that E flat. I mean, she could have easily gone, which is just so much less interesting, but it's what a lesser composer absolutely would have done, and they would have been delighted at the brilliant theme they'd come up with. So she didn't let that sit. She soars to the top. And then right after that, in measures 37, 38, 39, she does, it's another trick from Chopin, an enharmonic modulation. So this D flat here, it's like a magic trick, suddenly becomes a C sharp. And you don't even have to play it again. So I love it when she does things like that, very harmonically sophisticated, incredibly thoughtful. A lot of little twists in this one. And it is repetitive. So although it's quite long, if you it's in ABA form overall. If you learn the A section, almost the entire A prime section at the end will be the same, other than the coda. So if you manage to get that far, it will absolutely reward you. Just a couple of words about the second one before we dive really into the first one, the second romance. So this one is marked an allegretto, and I like its placement. I actually do like to play these three together as well as separately. Together they start with a kind of a slow, mournful one. They go to a slightly faster, lighthearted one, and then they go to a much faster, virtuosic one. There's a really nice trajectory to the three of them. But so this allegretto is, I think, very Mendelssohnian in quality. She says to play very tenderly, sehr zart zu spielen. And she makes all the notes very short. It has almost this kind of elfin Mendelssohn quality. Right, you can kind of see the spirits moving around in whatever way, this puckish way. And to me, one of the physical keys to playing this one is the shortness of this staccato. I would say if you're learning it, if you're thinking of learning it, to actively think about taking it from the key and almost pinching the note on your way away from it, as opposed to dropping. I think that's a very different quality, and especially as you go fast, you lose some of the sharpness of it. So that's one thing I would point out about this. The other tricky bit, or at least for me it was when I learned it, is the phrases, the phrase lengths. This is something else she gets from Mendelssohn. Mendelssohn always has these phrases that are just a little bit off from what you thought they were going to be. They're like a little longer, or they go towards the middle of the bar and not the end of the bar. They're somewhere they're not where you thought they were going to be. And she does this here. You could easily think the phrase really needs to come to a stop here. Right? Because you've come back to the artonic chord. So you could think that you need to end there. But if you end there, you've completely lost. So then you might be fooled into thinking, well, maybe the second one isn't a place to stop. But in fact, it is, because it's the end of the first full period. So I would say you have to think very carefully here about phrase lengths. Where are phrases actually going? And because this music allows for so much rubato, you could really show that in a big way. And Dominic, have you played this one?
Not this one. Number one, though, I have.
Well, we'll get to that one in a second. I just have one more thing to talk about in number two, which is another one of my little favorite spots. It measures 27. We have this great moment where, she wrote about these pieces that they were easy to the publisher. She said, you should publish them. Anybody can play them. Boy, if she thought this was easy, they are not easy. But, they're playable. So in this moment in 27, in the middle of the bar, the phrase begins in the right hand. Sorry. So, right? And you see that hairpin crescendo. And you might think that this goes... But it doesn't, because you see the hairpin crescendo in the left hand just after. This is a little bit classic Clara. She's got several voices operating at the same time. So you have... right? Responding to each other. And I have to say that physically this is really hard. Just to get that to really speak, especially once you're in tempo. So I would suggest working on that spot early on and really training the left hand to be able to speak in that way. As you can tell, I love these pieces, right? Could you tell
They're fantastic.
Yeah. So to the pièce de résistance, the first of the romances, which she wrote in one day, this passionate day, this A minor romance. And it's really a masterpiece. It really is. And Brahms actually performed it. It's the only one of her pieces that he performed in a public performance. She uses all this chromatic voice leading and all of this reharmonization. She was quite a master harmonizer. So that you have this theme, which by the way has this Hungarian inflection, which I think maybe Brahms's friend Joachim had brought into their relationship. And she takes this theme and puts it in a million different forms. So the first time it's this. The second iteration, but it's really the consequent, it's really the continuation of the same phrase. We have it again, but this time it doesn't do, it goes. And that actually fills our first complete phrase. So already before we've even finished the first real phrase, she's put this harmony in two different ways, right? She's reharmonized the ending part of it. Then she develops a different idea, a contrasting idea that leads up and is much less blocky in its writing. And I want to take a little time to tear apart those three measures, because it's brilliant writing. If you take the top line, so the notes that are stemmed up in the right hand, it's this. This beautiful rise of a ninth just over the octave, right? But if you take the notes that are stemmed down and then stemmed up in the bass, which is happens to be our fifth scale degree down to our home key, to A minor. Very sad, against this rising figure. And then in the middle, she adds suddenly a voice that hadn't been there before in measure 11, which overlaps with these other two voices and comes in sort of part way and continues through to the next part of the phrase, which in a certain way they don't, because in a certain way the first two voices kind of have come to a sort of ending place. It's a beautiful layering that she's doing, and as a performer you have to really be aware of the meaning of each one of them. Now, I don't know, Dominic, what do you think? Two voices and then a third one comes in a little bit later. Is that Robert and Clara and Johannes? Is that?
That's a great point to make. Three voices, yes. Fascinating.
You never know. Anyway, she finishes this middle section and she goes back up. This is that middle section. And if you are learning this piece, I roll this crazy huge chord by using the left hand for the top note of the right hand. And the reason I do that is because the voice leading, this is the most important note that's about to resolve to here. So if I put that in my fifth finger and I play the left hand kind of quietly, I can help really bring that out. So you can hear that connection. And then we come back to our opening. Same as before. Looks like it's the same as the opening, but the opening was. And this time we go. So this is a place where she hasn't actually changed the harmony, but she's changed the voicing of it and the register of it and taken it all the way down. So I don't think for yourself, what is the difference in emotional quality between write an indication. She doesn't, they're both in piano, there's no other dynamic, but I think she's expecting you to understand that this has a completely different emotional import and therefore should be played a completely different way, and that it's going somewhere different, which should also impact where you go. And then for the first time she reharmonizes the beginning of this melody. She adds this very gnarly, rich, diminished chord with extra layers in it, and descends in order to give us a full cadence here. So this cadence, much more satisfying than that one is not so satisfying somehow. Even the cadence before the middle theme came, where we had, because although it's a solid cadence, we're modulating there, so it doesn't feel as much like home. This one really has the feeling of closure. And then she begins the middle section, but she begins it with this anacrusis, with this dominant chord that clearly has to lead somewhere, but she's not. She hasn't given you any indication there. Nothing says, oh, roll this. Nothing says take time here. Of course you have to take time there. You have to take a lot of time there. Feel free. I think the freedom that you play these with, once you've understood the phrase structure, once you have a reason for what you do, the most important thing in performing her music is to play it freely, to play it with a great deal of rubato, but that rubato has to be harmonically and formally based. That's, those were so important to her, harmony and form. So here's the closing of the form. And you could do whatever you want here. I roll it because I can't reach this. And then this middle section, completely different character. so full of angst and tension. And I don't know about you, Dominic, but the first thing that scared me when I was learning this was those quintuplets in the left hand, right?
Absolutely. Five against what?
And I think this is very much a Chopin-esque idea. This is not a late 20th century quintuplet that needs to fit in the pattern exactly. This is a romantic idea, that can flow. And if you just kind of, it needs to figure out the pacing of moving versus not moving. And eventually you have to just let it go and not think about it. Just know that this is the note you need to get to. Because by this moment, you're going to want to be with the right hand because this... But before you want to fit in all those notes, and you're going to worry about the right hand instead. So I think that's one big thing in this middle section. Another spot that's very tricky here is measure 41. This is after she's giving, so we've moved to D minor. Thick, dense harmonies, very romantic style, even though the form of this piece is so traditional, so classical in many ways. And she gives us this little moment of sunshine, but she hovers on it. So it's not really peaceful, but something has changed from where we were before, right? The calando tells us we've slowed down, and then she gives us this almost like a waltz, right? The left hand. There's a slightly dancey feeling. She keeps going. And this, by the way, is very unclear in all the editions, but I think the middle notes here should be played with your left hand. It's just easier, unless you have a massive hand. Harmonic progression here, which is great, this rising thing, which would never have happened in the classical period, but is very Beethoven-esque, actually. Pulling up this tremendous energy. I mean, we're recording this today, or we're coming to you today from Hollywood. Yes. It's a very Hollywood gesture, very right? And then you get to the statement of the original theme, but much broader than before. And this moment that's coming up is to this great, maybe one of you has the answer. So Clara loved to quote, right, Robert's music, and in the Violin Romances, Opus 22, which came right after this, the quotation is super clear. It's from the A minor violin sonata. You can hear exactly where it is, and here's the quotation. I'm sure this is where the quotation is. So here it is. So now it reminds me of a number of different Robert Schumann pieces. The first one, the one that I feel most strongly, is the last of the clarinet Fantasiestücke in the coda. Although the rhythm there's a little bit different. The harmony is not exactly the same. If you have ideas out there, if you think you know where this is from and why she put specifically that one in this, I would love to hear them. But anyway, I think they are slightly different in character from everything else, which is partly what makes them feel like a quotation. This dotted rhythm and the grandeur of it, and the fact that, again, one voice answering the other. So we get that idea, the two of them talking to each other. Here again, one line going up and one going down. Right? So gnarly. And then she finally resolves. And you get this is measured 61 here, we get to this very, to me, the most sort of pitiful moment in this piece, which begins again on the anacrusis, begins on the upbeat. passion. There's something very lonely about this. The rest in the left hand. So painful. And then Dominic and I were discussing this before. Probably the most difficult 3 bars in certain ways in the entire set of romances, right?
Absolutely.
66 or 68. This bit. And the reason it's so difficult is because she is unwavering. She's unstinting in the voice leading. She will not give up any of this line that. Right, she won't give up any of those notes. So we get this thing. And at the same time, she wants this very active, very agitated feeling in the center, right? But I don't know about you, I only have 2 hands. So at that moment, I always wish I had a third, but I understand what she's doing. She brings us to this dominant pedal. Already we're here. We've been sitting on this E, right? So we know eventually we're going to be headed back to A, which is our tonic key, and that will bring us back to the opening theme. And she does another beautiful little thing here with these E's once they come up to the top. So E here, right? The right hand descends, but the E's stay here. And I'm not going to resolve that just yet. Let's follow another line. Another line is the top of the left hand, which is. That one actually really goes to the end. It actually, the reason I love that line is because it continues to where you're expecting it to. But the first line that I was showing you does not go to, if you notice, in the chord, which is the same as what had been the opening chord of the entire piece. We're missing that note. There's a low A down here, but there's no A in this voice. And I think that's so poignant. You hear it at the beginning and you think, oh, this is beautiful, there's something mournful about it. I don't know what it is. But this is the moment where I think it becomes so clear. Oh, a part of her is missing. Part of her is gone. She's a master of that, the missing note. This time nothing's been reorchestrated, nothing's changed. We're completely changed. This is the definition of a great composer. We have been completely transformed by the journey. And this little detail, this fact that she leaves out the resolution for us, makes it so clear, so beautiful, and just, overwhelming. And when she comes back at the end, so that now we're back to the opening section, and she repeats most of the same things, but in this time she grows them each time. So the next time the theme comes, it's this in both hands. And then when she does the harmonic change of the chord, this is much bigger than it was before. From this moment on, we're sitting on a dominant pedal. And she writes stringendo, but it's not clear where the stringendo ends. I think this should be as impassioned as you can possibly make it. Keep going for as long as you can with energy. And finally resolve here. Most complete cadence and ending. I just adore this piece.
It's unbelievable. So beautiful. I mean, when are you recording these? That's what we're all wondering.
Yes, yes, soon. Absolutely. It's got to come. I've been playing them for the last couple of years. So you asked me before when I came to Clara, you know, really recently, because all I really knew of her music was the concerto. And I think the concerto is a very unfair piece to judge her by.
Oh.
She was only 16 when she wrote it. She had Robert orchestrate the third movement, which is the most successful of the movements. So I also wonder about the sort of feminist question of putting her out there most famously with a piece that Robert finished.
Oh.
I wonder about that. It has beautiful things in it, but it's not the maturity of a composer that this is. It would be like, taking Mendelssohn's double concerto, the violin and piano concerto, and saying, judge Mendelssohn by this. It's a lovely piece. I enjoy playing it. But it's not his violin concerto.
Of course not.
Right.
Of course not. Well, thank you so much. I think we have some time for perhaps some questions that we can get to, if that's okay, Orli.
Yeah, super.
So this has been fascinating and beautiful, both in my words and also Jeanette, who just typed that. So we're going to take a look at some questions. I did notice that before the stream, Alice had a few specific questions about the romances and in playing them. These are great pieces, by the way, everybody, for many levels. The first piece, is there an ordering you might say of what's easier, what's more approachable to start with in these three, or?
Yeah, in certain ways, I think actually the second is the least approachable.
The least approachable.
Because it's the techniques in it are tricky. The phrasing, like you have to be a pretty sophisticated musician to make any sense out of it at all. I think the first is probably that would be my first one to approach.
Okay.
But the minute you have somebody who's doing, if you're a teacher, the minute you have somebody who's doing like Czerny exercises, which by the way, Clara did all of and was involved in editing. Anybody who's been doing those Czerny exercises can do the third. So.
Good to know. Good to know. Well, so perhaps one, and then you said maybe three.
Maybe three. I think you could play the notes in two, but I find two to be musically very sophisticated, tricky to pull off.
Good to know. So with number one, I see Alice asking a question about. I'm gonna pull up bar 22. Bar 22 has these large chords in number one. And it's difficult for me to play the left hand wide leaps accurately and in a relaxed way. So actually, the question is actually about the left hand octaves.
Is it about the octaves, or is it actually about bar 21, which is the tenth?
Well, a mixture, a mixture of those, and also actually Alice is specifying as well that E, B, E going down. And relaxing the hand for those octaves.
Yes, that is tricky.
Yeah, I don't know. Do you have advice a bit more in depth about? Because your hand's actually not.
My hand is tiny, and compare. I mean, I've got a sort of a ninth in my left hand and an octave in my right. And she had a tenth. She had a solid tenth.
Wow.
She was forever writing in tenths. I really, honestly, it's the one thing I criticize her for. But she also lived in a time when rolling was completely expected. There are places where she specifically asks for it, but even if she doesn't ask for it, it would have been fine to do. So these tenths I always break. And this. So you have to, obviously I have to break up this. I think this slur that she has here, that it's down, up, I think that helps the octave of going down there. And I know what you mean. It's kind of a depth perception thing. If you play this note and then play this one, take your fifth finger, turn it into a fourth finger, and then move. Or even into a second finger, and then move, so that you're kind of anchored inside the keyboard. I don't know if you can see that clearly. I think that'll help, and use the fact that these two are slurred together, so they're supposed to be connected in some way. That's a great question. It's tricky with her music.
Great. Well, thank you. Let's see if we have some other questions. We had a question also about number three, actually, the romance number three. So in this case, let's see which bar number we're on. It looks like, let me just find the bar number for that, because notably, I think we should all be looking at Henley, because it seems like Dover is the one that's perhaps free on IMSLP. So that was the score that was. Let me quickly find this bar.
Well, I'm happy that some of her scores are free.
Yes,
right? That's only good news for us.
Exactly. I think, yeah, but I think she's talking about 129 and 130. Trying to, in her words, for number three, it's challenging to play these arpeggios smoothly, and also particularly that leap from that B all the way up to that G sharp in
Yes,
the
so
left hand.
that's great question. So you've got plenty of time. Remember, romantic music. I would take that left hand and I take my time, come up. So think about the fact that a lot of those notes need to be held, but not this one. Again, grounding your hand in the keyboard is going to make it easier to play evenly. So it's not going to feel quite as wild. And the other thing I love about that particular spot, actually, is you picked one of my favorite moments, is where I just ended this, where she just left it out. If she had done this, sorry, and made them both the same general rhythm, it would have been perfectly fine. But this gorgeous thing of leaving out. So you're allowed to take as much time as you want to float over there.
Amazing. So, in other words, with these leaps, you're just allowing the hand to move at its pace, and you're not compressing anything. You're kind of allowing that space to speak for itself.
I think this whole middle section's very, very filled with rubato, particularly because the outer sections are so quick and sprightly. I think you can be really free here.
Great. That's wonderful to know. Yes, because I think that's basically answering that question. And then, do you have any advice on a passage that's coming up? Let me see here. Where is that? Sorry, I'm just trying to. Oh, here we go. 202, it would be. Bar 202. On playing those arpeggios, playing them smoothly, any advice about these 5 bars or so of smooth arpeggios?
Yeah. Tricky, because she had such a great technique because she played everybody, right? She was such a performer, such a virtuosa. Think about going over the thumb. What you want to do is like kind of anchor yourself in a position, and then new position, you're going over the thumb, you're here. And now you're just going over a little bit to get up there. And then again, this time you're going under the 4th finger rather than over, but you're anchoring yourself again. I would definitely not play any of these detached. I would hold on to notes. I would find like an anchor into the keyboard that keeps you safe and keeps you grounded. And she's written it with that in mind. It's very easy to find those fingerings.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And let's see. We have a number of other comments, but no specific questions aside from those about the pieces. And just out of curiosity, the Dover edition, do you use that for anything, or do you find it perhaps not worthwhile?
Well, no. There are a couple of things in the Henley where I'm not sure about notes. There are a couple of note issues.
Interesting.
In this particular piece, there's just one. It's actually in the first Romance. There's a question of whether something's a 10th or not. I haven't looked at the autograph, so I don't have the answer.
Okay.
And there's another place where I looked at this for reference, at the Dover for reference, because the Henley doesn't make it clear when the left hand goes up an octave. So I have found it useful to look at both. Maybe someday we'll get the definitive Clara Schumann edition, but for now, I would take a look at both. But like I say, that Henley's just psychologically so much easier to work from, at least for me.
Yes, absolutely. And the other question that I have is, in regards to her last opus, was that opus 22 or is that
there's an opus 23 as well.
23. So she actually stopped composing at a pretty early age. Do you have any thoughts on why that was?
She stopped composing when he died. She stopped composing when Robert died. And I have a number of thoughts. One thought is that all her life, she depended on praise from him to feel like she was worthy as a composer. And with him gone, maybe she didn't feel confident enough to do that. That's one. We'll put that in one category. The minute he died, she made it her life's mission to edit all of his works. And that was a massive task. and she had already been doing some of that beforehand. But editing is painstaking work that takes a really long time. So I think that maybe took over what would have been composition for her. And the minute he died, she didn't have any income that was going to come in from him. She wasn't going to get rich composing. She was going to get rich performing and teaching. So, I mean, I don't know about rich, but she wasn't going to support her family performing and teaching. So that's what she went to do. So I think, in a sense, it's completely logical that she stopped at that point. But it's awfully sad because we can see in these later works that she really did have a maturity. These works are absolutely the works of a mature artist who is a seasoned performer and who has a tremendous knowledge of all the repertoire.
Absolutely. And I see that Vigya mentions that so many pieces were dedicated to Clara. Vigya just saw a Gluck Brahms transcription that was dedicated to her and wondered about the backstory. I don't know the backstory of that one, but it does seem like Brahms did dedicate a number of pieces. Most notably, I remember reading that he dedicated Opus 118 to her, but then didn't end up printing it that way. I forget the story, but truly fascinating.
Well, and she, for him, I think she was in many ways a muse. And when I was growing up, I sort of assumed, maybe it was in the air, I was told that somehow she served as the muse for both Schumann and Brahms, but she was somehow influenced by both of them. For Brahms, for Schumann, it's a completely different story. As I was saying at the beginning, that they really, in certain ways, they grew up musically together. For Brahms, she was certainly a muse. She was his teacher. She was like his mother. I mean, she gave him advice on, how to negotiate contracts and, on where to live. She really took care of him in so many ways, and he respected her and admired her so much as a musician, as his own teacher in so many ways.
Wow. Well, thank you. That's such a beautiful. I mean, you know so much about her, so I mean,
it's all in there.
It's all in there. So again, just to plug this book one more time, I'll put that on the screen.
Yeah.
Clara Schumann, The Artist and the Woman by Nancy Reich. Is it Reich? Reich, I believe. Yeah.
I never met her, so it's Reich
yes.
to me, but
very good. So please, everyone, this is an underrated book. Another good book you had mentioned to me was The Masks of Schumann, I believe, that gets into that a little bit.
The Faces and the Masks. That's wonderful, by Judith Chernak.
Absolutely, and so I think that we might have answered all the questions that have been asked today. So if you have other questions, feel free to ask. But I do want to plug certainly that Orli has a new Mozart CD, that volumes 4 of the complete sonatas that just came out. Is that right?
Yep.
So that should be coming out. That just came out, and then 5 and 6 are coming out in the fall. Is that right?
And that will make the complete Mozart sonatas.
Wow.
I'll be done with the project.
Wow. And so how was that? Was that a pretty rewarding experience for you?
It was an amazing experience for me. I mean, I learned so much from doing all 18 sonatas sort of as a group and thinking of them that way. I don't know if you've ever played all 18.
No, I have not.
Yeah.
I would love to one day, but that is something else.
And just a project of passion. And it was recorded in both very easy circumstances in 2019 before the pandemic, and also in some crazy circumstances in August of 2020 in order to finish the recording. But we managed to finish all the recording, and now we're almost done with all the editing. And one of my favorite aspects of this project has been the liner notes. We've done different things for each of the discs. I mean, I know nobody buys discs anymore, but the liner notes are available elsewhere if you get the music. And so we've kind of talked about Mozart from a number of different perspectives, which has been fascinating. And I'm particularly excited about the next ones coming up. So
wonderful. Well, hopefully you'll also excuse me. Hopefully you'll also record all of Clara Schumann's music as well. We would love that. So let's see. I think that's all of the questions for now. And then Gail asked about the Henley edition being available in the Tonebase app. Well, I can certainly share that edition with you, Gail. So hopefully that will be of some help. And Orli, do you have any last thoughts or comments about this music and Clara?
It's so wonderful that we can find not only tremendous music that is new to us because it's new, but tremendous music that is new to us because it just wasn't really played enough. And seeking out this music and figuring out where the masterpieces really lie is a tremendously rewarding experience. So whether you are looking for them because you want to learn them yourself, or if you want to dig up and do research and find a favorite time period and composers, there's a lot that we don't know and that we really ought to know.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing about Clara, her life, her music, her compositions, and why we should be playing her music. So please check out Orli's Tonebase Mozart lessons, because in addition, of course, to releasing the CDs recently, she has a wonderful course on the sonatas. So everyone, thank you so much for joining today. Orli, thank you so much for, Orli actually just got off a plane a few hours ago, so this has been a very serendipitous live stream. So thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you for having me, Dominic. It's
absolutely,
been a pleasure.
Absolutely a pleasure. And everyone stay tuned for more of Orli's work on Tonebase coming shortly. Cheers, everyone. Have a good rest of your week.